Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for watching the John Woodard Show. We have the honor today of interviewing Cleta Mitchell. At the conclusion of the 2020 election, she was one of the primary people that was trying to get to the truth of what happened in that election, and she's working real hard to make sure that the problems of 2020 are not repeated in 22. So with that, I want to introduce you to Cleta Mitchell. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you, John. It's really great to be with you. I'm honored to be on your podcast and great to be able to talk to your audience.
Let's start with the where we were. I'm sure you had a lot of responsibilities in government, but once the 20 election problems began to manifest themselves, and you were really thrown into the fray, weren't you?
Well, I was. I mean, I'm an election attorney. I've been practicing law really until a year ago. I've been practicing law for many, many years. And my practice has always been in the area of elections, campaigns, campaign finance, all the what I call the business and regulation of politics and policy, all the process issues. People don't realize, but campaigns and campaign candidates, political parties, lobbying, running for office, conducting elections, all highly regulated. A lot of state and federal and local laws that impact all of those. So that's been my area of practice for a very long time. And so in the 2020 election, I had been representing for some time Senator Steve Daines from Montana and the Montana Republican Party, and had been they'd been on the receiving end of some of those infamous Mark Elias Democratic Party left-wing advocacy groups litigation coming into Montana to upend the election laws, including one election law that the legislature had referred to the people of Montana to prohibit ballot harvesting or ballot trafficking, and to make sure that the only ballots that could be returned had to be your own ballot or that of a family member, or if you were a caregiver for a voter. But none of this political operatives going in and gathering ballots and dumping them in a drop box, which is what the left did during 2020. And so the people of Montana had voted by 63% in favor of banning ballot trafficking. And of course, the left these left-wing groups, there's a plethora of those, and they came in and they filed, I think we had either 4 or 5 lawsuits filed in state and federal court against Montana election laws, coming in to upend those laws, get rid of those common sense election administration to protect the integrity of the election. So I've been involved with that throughout 2020. And so I went to Montana for the election and helped with running their election day operations out there in the war room, where we'd receive the calls into the hotline about what was going on out in the field, if there were problems, et cetera. And so I was in my car in Bozeman, Montana, the day after the election, November 4th, really heading back to the airport where I was going to fly back to my home in North Carolina. And I got a call from Mark Meadows, who's the chief of staff to President Trump at the time, asking me if I would ask him, well, where are you, Cleta? I said, well, I'm in Bozeman, Montana, where we won everything. And Mark Meadows said, could you go to Atlanta? And I said, okay, on one condition, you have to make sure there's at least one person on the ground in Atlanta who knows I'm coming. Because I've been in those situations where I walk in someplace, nobody knows you're coming, and they're kind of, who are you? So I said,
I've been in that position myself.
I said, so between now and the time I get to the airport, there's about 20 minutes. You got to have one person who is in Atlanta call me and say, hello, Cleta, we're glad you're coming, whether they meant it or not. So I changed my flight and I went to Atlanta and began to start looking at the election and what had transpired on November 3rd. And what became pretty clear, again, remember, I'm an election lawyer. And what I began to realize pretty quickly is that there were a lot of problems with the way that the election was conducted in Georgia. There were a lot of votes that were cast and counted in violation of state law. I'll give you one data point, and then we could go on. I could spend the whole time talking about Georgia, but there are other states and situations to talk about. But the final margin between President Trump and Joe Biden, the final certified margin in Georgia, was 11,779 votes. Our little team of lawyers and experts, well, we didn't have any experts on the ground, but we found some experts who were willing to look at the government data and help us. And we identified over 30 categories of votes that were cast in violation of state law. And just one category, there were 18,325 votes cast from individuals who were registered to vote at a vacant lot. Now, we all know that there's something wrong with that. There are another 904 ballots that were cast and counted. So this is almost another 1,000 that were people who are registered at a P.O. box. And we have photographs of the UPS store or the post office. And under Georgia law, that's not a legal residence for voting purposes. So those are just two of the more than 30 categories that we found. So we filed an election contest, which as an election lawyer, I know that's what you have to do is you have to find specific votes that were cast under dubious circumstances, irregularities, or illegally cast and counted. And we filed a 64-page election contest with over 1,000 pages of verified affidavits and sworn affidavits of both fact witnesses and expert witnesses, having reviewed publicly available government data. And we filed that election contest on December the 4th and asked for expedited review. And the election code of Georgia, under which the contest was filed, provides for expedited review. And lo and behold, we never got a judge appointed to hear the case. So President Trump never got his day in court in Georgia. I don't care what anybody says. They say the president lost all these cases. Well, he didn't lose our case because it was never adjudicated. We didn't ever have a judge appointed. So and since that time, there have been other lawsuits filed. There have been other citizen actions. And what is pretty clear is that at least in Fulton County and maybe a couple of other counties, that place was just a mess. And we do not know for certain who won Georgia. And the same thing can be said about Arizona. After the audit, it's clear that we don't really know who won Arizona. The same thing is true in Wisconsin and in Pennsylvania. There have been analyses of both of those states, and that was the conclusion. Because of the number of illegal votes and irregular votes, we don't really know who won those states. That's 4 states. That's enough to have made the difference in the Electoral College certification. But that's what I was doing in 2020, and then in early 2021, when some people found out, some of the left-wingers, never Trumpers, found out that I was doing work for President Trump, then they came after me and my law firm, where I'd been a partner for almost 20 years, and decided that they needed to force our clients, the law firm's clients, to demand that I be fired or they were going to take their business elsewhere, et cetera. And I didn't really have any interest in wrecking the law firm that I'd called home for all those years. So I left, and now I work full-time on election integrity. So I figure that that's what God intended for me to do instead of continue to do billable hours.
Certainly seems like you had an engraved invitation, didn't it?
It did. I think that's right. I think that's right.
Well, as we go through into the situation into the next election, what really concerns me is that the radical wing of the Democratic Party is pushing the entire party so far to the left that has brought about all these issues that we see now with immigration and crime, and on and on and on and on. I mean, there's a gaggle of them. And the Democrats have come so far with attempting to transform the United States and bring in the Great Reset.
Mm-hmm.
I really wonder if we're not going to be dealing with maybe not a voter problem, but an emergency powers problem that's going to be invoked in order to uh, vacate the necessity of the 22 election. I mean, you can't expect these people to have come this far and to say, "Oh well, so too bad, so sad, we lost the election.
No.
We'll wait until the next time." I mean, it isn't going to
Well,
happen.
that that they don't think that way. If you ever want to know what they're planning, you need to listen and watch and hear what they're saying we're doing, and that will tell you what they're doing, because
Yes, ma'am.
they telegraph what they're doing by accusing us of doing things. By us, I mean conservatives. And
Yeah,
so the things that they're saying are that we are going to swamp the election offices with what we call rule of law, election officials and observers and people to watch what's going on in the election offices. And they are doing everything they can do to keep citizens out of the election process when the laws of every state envision a very significant citizen engagement role as either an election worker appointed, hired by the county or the municipality, whoever is conducting the election, or as observers to be able to see what's going on. And so, as we are working toward recruiting and training and deploying citizens to assume those rightful duties as election workers and election observers, the left is doing everything they can do to try to intimidate and cause citizens to be afraid to be involved in the election process. They want everything to be done. They're like cockroaches. They like to do everything in the dark. And they don't like this idea that we start shining a light on what they've been doing. And so they're also, I'll tell you, the most frightening thing to me is that Mark Zuckerberg and his wife gave over nearly $500 million. That's a billion with a B, to to give money to targeted election offices in certain states. And we know that that had the effect. They then in turn hired um, people, operatives from these very left-wing groups, and they basically they went door to door. They had access to the voting database of these localities, and then they would go door to door and get their ballots, register people to vote in the case where they had same-day registration, and just collect their ballots. And who knows whether they were even valid ballots, frankly, because the secretaries of state of Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and Georgia essentially, and Arizona essentially unilaterally did away with the requirement for signature matching on mail ballots. So there's a big problem with the mail ballots. But what they did, they used that money to hire operatives who then went in and they drove up the Democratic totals in the Democratic cities in Arizona and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and Georgia, cities and counties. And then it was enough to offset President Trump's margins statewide. And so all of those states were lost by President Trump by very small margins, 10,000, let's see, 10,479 and 476 in Arizona, as I said, 11,779 in Georgia, and very small margins. And now what we see is the Biden administration has issued an executive order in March of last year, just a year ago last week, directing all federal agencies to become voter registration centers. So, and they give as the example, if you're a student or family applying for financial aid to go to college, you'll get a voter registration form that pops up as part of your application. If you go see your doctor and you're on Medicare, you'll get a voter registration form as part of your signing in to see your doctor. And it doesn't matter, perhaps, and we have a case like this in Texas we learned about just 2 weeks ago, where a woman took her elderly mother into the health clinic, and they had her mother sign on an iPad, dot here, push here. And the daughter said, please give me a copy of the forms that you just had my mother sign, one of which was a voter registration form. The daughter was very upset, called the congressman's office to say how upset she was because her mother's had dementia and has not voted in more than 10 years because she doesn't have the cognitive ability to vote. But she's now back in that system. And you mark my words, their goal is to make sure that everybody who gets registered votes, whether or not the person and who is actually registered is even aware of the vote. So that's what I'm most worried about, is that they're going to use our tax dollars to manipulate the outcome of the election, notwithstanding that their policies are wildly unpopular. The people are not supportive of the socialistic policies. They're not supportive. I just saw something this morning, 64% of the American people disagree with Biden's policy on not producing American energy. And their goal is to basically obliterate the principle that's in our Declaration of Independence, which is that the Declaration of Independence says that governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. That's a very important principle. And the way we give and withdraw consent in America is through elections. And if these people are successful in making sure that the elections are manipulated and the outcome is predetermined based on how they manipulated them, then we've really lost that principle of consent of the governed. It's very distressing and of great concern to me.
And what can we do to negate, these adverse elements?
Well, look, I think that there are a lot of things that can be done, but I think one of the most important things is, and we've published it. I have a website, www.whoscounting.us, and we have created the Conservative Partnership Institute is where I work. I'm a senior legal fellow there, and we've created the Election Integrity Network. And our goal is to educate and mobilize and deploy conservatives and patriotic citizens across America to become involved in the system. We want to create local citizen task forces in every county and every community in America to be ever present in the election offices, to know what kind of voting systems are being used, and to have citizen oversight of those voting systems, to be there when they're counting the whole process of issuing ballots, counting ballots, the post-election canvass, just watching everything that goes on. And by doing that, I really do believe we can make a lot of it stop, because the left has just been so used to doing what they want with nobody watching and with impunity. And they don't like it that we're trying to now come back into the process. That's why they're threatening us, saying that our presence there is harassment, intimidation. It's not. It's just that they don't want us there. So that's where we need to be. And we have a booklet. We have a booklet on my website. There's a booklet called The Citizen's Guide to Building an Election Integrity Infrastructure. And it can be downloaded. And 5 people in a county can get that and start a task force, build a task force, grow a task force, create a statewide network, and just say, no more. We're Americans. We know how to do this, and we're going to make sure that our elections are run properly. And there's so much to do. Citizens are finding that out. There's a lot to do to clean up our elections.
Well, in the fact that we've only got 9 months before we have the midterm elections, and that's that's not very much time when you've got such a steep hill in front of you.
But we just have to do the best we can do. We didn't lose it in a day, one election cycle, and we're not going to fix it in one election cycle. We're just learning as we go about all the things that have happened and that have been done.
I guess, don't you?
I beg your pardon?
You know Doug Gould, don't you?
I'm sorry, I still don't understand you.
Doug Gould, You know
Doug
him, don't you?
Gould? No, I don't know him.
He was on the panel with you in Moore
Oh,
County,
oh, oh, and the Moore
and,
County thing. Oh, okay, that's
and
right. Well, I met him that day. I don't really know him.
he was on the panel of cyber experts that were part of the Mike Lindell Forum out in South Dakota, and he's been a he worked for 40 years with Bell Labs, he's a top cybersecurity expert. I just was curious to see if you had had the opportunity to work with him along the way or something.
Well, look, I
What
mean,
did he do?
I will tell you one of the things that uh, I think it's important that people understand how voting systems work. I'm not a technology person. I think every citizens task force needs a couple of people who talk and understand technology, so that they can actually know what the voting systems are, what the certification standards are, whether they've been certified, how long it's been since they've been certified, and how they're supposed to work, et cetera. I'm not one of those people. But I will tell you that I do find it disturbing if people, and I think it's a little bit of a cop out. It's easy to say, oh, it's all the voting systems. It's just the voting systems. And, China hacked into our voting machines. And therefore, that's what we have to deal with. I have yet to see the evidence of that, John. I waited with bated breath for the big reveal from the Cyber Symposium. I watched as much of the Cyber Symposium as I could. I've watched all of that. And, I'm a lawyer, and I look at everything and say, could I put that in a court of law and defend it? Do I have enough evidence? Do I have an expert? Somebody just came to do I've got a blower going outside my house. I apologize for that. but anyway, right? Wouldn't you know, they'd come right now. But
It's,
I just think that there's so many things to do. I don't want people to use that as a reason not to do the other hard work, if that makes any sense. Figure out what the things are that you can do that will help make sure that that what's going on in the voting systems in your county or city, um, that the voting is transparent, and that the people who are going to vote are who they say they are, and all of that kind of thing. There's so much to do. You read my citizens guide, you realize there's a lot to do. And the voting machines and software, that's just one aspect. It's important, but it's not the only aspect. There's so much more. And I don't want people to say, well, that's the smoking gun. Because so far I haven't seen that. I know there are a lot of people who talk about it, a lot of smoke, but I haven't found the fire there yet. I haven't seen it.
what about these local judges that rule on these cases? Don't have standing, this, that, and the other, all the kind of gyrations that they utilize to justify their ruling, whatever that is. What is there anything that you can do about that? Then these
Well,
people are
look, I
all
mean, I will
elected.
tell you that I think the real story that we haven't talked about as much as we should have is how badly the judiciary failed and to uphold and to do its job in the 2020 election. You had very partisan courts. Well, I believe that there are remedies and all of these to all of these problems that are already, the remedies exist. I'm not for throwing out the baby with the bathwater. I'm for using the remedies that are available to us and to fight those things. And for too long, we've let the left out organize us, and and basically, boil the frog a little bit at a time. And so I think it's time for the frog to jump out of the water and say,
Most
we're
certainly
not going to put
is,
up with this anymore.
absolutely. Is there anything else, any closing statement that you think that would add to this discussion that people would want to hear? If so, please proceed.
Well, I just have to say that there is a role for every person in America in terms of becoming involved in the election process and becoming an election worker, becoming a poll observer. They're called different things in different states. Research your election office. How does your election administration work where you live? Is the supervisor of elections elected? Is it an administrator who is appointed? Who appoints? Who are the people who do the appointing? What contracts do they have? Who's doing business? Who's working? Who's going to those offices and board meetings? I mean, it's just like all these parents who are finally awakened and going to school board meetings. We need to be doing the same thing with election offices. And if we do that, and that's what they want us not to do, they're threatening us, they're trying to intimidate us, and we just have to put a smile on and say, we're coming anyway. These are our elections, and we have to find things out. We have to keep doing research and finding out what's going on behind the scenes. We can't just go vote and go home. And we can't wait till the voting starts. We need to be about this every day of the year, all the time. So that's happened in some states. It's happening, and we want that to happen in more and more states. We want citizen engagement to reclaim our election process and make sure that we don't lose that important American principle articulated in the Declaration of Independence that governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. We cannot let the loony left sever the relationship between the people giving and withdrawing their consent to the public officials. That's what the left wants to do. They want to just impose their will so that we don't have anything to say about it. And we can't let that happen, or we've lost our country. So I think the country's worth fighting for. So even as daunting as it seems sometimes, I think we just have to keep working, keep plugging away, and we will make a difference. We will.
I'm afraid that the Great Reset has already begun, and that people are. I hope that people are waking up. I think that they are, maybe a little bit slowly, but I think people are waking up. Uh, if we don't fight and take it and retain the country that we've all grown up in and known all our lives, if we're going to have to answer to somebody if we let that slip away.
We have to at least try, don't we?
Absolutely.
That's the number one thing. We have to try. We may not win, but I think we can win. But we have to try, no matter what. We have to fight. This country's worth fighting for.
Absolutely. Cleta Mitchell, it's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you.
I hope that I will see you in other forums like Moore County.
I hope so too.
Wish you a lot of luck.